Testing 1.
Testing 2.
Testing 3.
Testing 4.
There
Yes.
you go. Brilliant. Well done, Paul. Well done. Yeah.
Bit of a delay there. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you.
So-
Thank you so much for joining us, Paul. Everybody else, welcome to the Testing Podcast. We are zooming in from Florida. We've got a wonderful guest in the shape of Paul Clayton joining us here via Zoom. Currently, as you just said to us off air, in Hurricane Alley. So hopefully you haven't got one bearing down on you at the moment for the next sort of 45 minutes or so.
Not today, but we have alligators, we have copperheads, rattlesnakes, and perhaps most dangerous of all, we have Floridians.
Excellent. The most dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, Paul, to join us, because we know you're a very, very busy man. And we'll give a little shout out to Jackie Fairweather, who has an acupuncture colleague, friend of mine of many years, who kind of said, you've got to get Paul on the podcast. You've got to get Paul on the podcast. So thank you, Jackie, for making the introduction, getting you on here. So, Paul, why don't you give us, because I could look up your bio and read it out, but there's no better person than yourself to introduce yourself. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
When all these gurus tell you that when you want to make friends and influence people, you ask people to talk about themselves. I'm sick of it.
Okay.
I don't think of myself as particularly, important. I think of myself as a conduit. There is a lot of information which is being generated by scientific groups and research teams all over the world. I have a jackdaw mind. I look at what interests me, I suppose. I follow particular trains of interest, and I've become a generalist. But I'm as much of a rapporteur now as I was ever a primary scientist. I'm a parasite. I live off, the scientific material that is now largely generated by others. That's going to change going forwards. I'm working on a really fascinating and I think important project, which is going to be sponsored by some very interesting Russian entrepreneurs, which I think will change nutritional medicine. Mm-hmm. And this is Project Cocoon. And if you like, I can sort of talk about that in more detail. I'd rather talk about that than myself. I don't find myself that interesting.
Well, we'll talk about your work and the science and the stuff that you've been looking at. So, but your background is this kind of nutritional kind of side of things, and I think on your bio it says, was it pharmaco-nutrition? Is that the sort of title?
Well, I was trained as a clinical pharmacologist at the University of Edinburgh back in the day when that was actually a very respectable university. Mm-hmm. And I became interested in what was then called natural pharmacology, the pharmacology of foods and food extracts. And somewhere along the line, this transformed into pharmaco-nutrition. It actually happened at a very uncomfortable meeting of the Committee on the Safety of Medicines, which is a forerunner of EFSA, the British forerunner. Yep. And I was one of the what was known as senior scientific advisors. That's a civil service term. I was actually quite junior. And I still remember quite vividly at this meeting with, I think, 20 or so professors, all of whom were incredibly ancient, gray-bearded, dusty, probably younger than I am now. And we'd been reviewing the side effects, which were extremely interesting and various, of some new blockbuster drug, which was about to be licensed. I was involved in that process. Mm-hmm. And I'd become very skeptical of pharmaceutical therapy, which derives from, originally, you can go back to Louis Pasteur, and before him, there's actually, it's not turtles all the way down. It's very interesting and very creative scientists who you can trace back, I suppose, to von Leeuwenhoek, the Dutch microscopist, and from that you get this concept of magic bullets. So I've become very aware of the limitations of that approach. And I asked these professors, why don't we, instead of looking at pharmaceuticals, why don't we look at the pharmacological attributes of food? Mm-hmm. Because that seems to me to be more diverse, potentially more potent, and obviously orders of magnitude safer. Mm-hmm. And they said, okay, what do you actually mean? I said, I think we should, rather than talking about nutrition, I was never a nutrition. We should talk about the pharmacological attributes of these compounds that are in food and look at them and test them and examine them in the same way that we examine pharmaceutical products. And I said, let's call this pharmaco-nutrition. And the reception was uniformly hostile. I was told this is nonsense. You know, define your terms. And I said, I think what it means is let's try to identify as many of the pathological processes and metabolic errors that contribute and drive a disease process. Identify as many of them as we can, and then cross-reference against that the known pharmacological attributes of all these different food extracts. And because they're so safe, we can practice polypharmacy. We can add polyphenols and omega-3s and vitamin E and all kinds of other things without risking exposing our patients to catastrophic series of adverse effects. And it's an open secret. We kill a lot of our patients with pharmaceuticals. Very important cause of death. And I said, well, with these natural compounds, polypharmacy is not an issue. If you sit down to a dish of ratatouille, you are consuming hundreds and hundreds of pharmacologically active compounds. I'm not aware that many people die of ratatouille. But, I mean, lots and lots of people.
Not everybody likes it, but nobody's dying of it.
Well, exactly. But whereas we kill so many people with NSAIDs, with blood thinners, with the biologicals. And my feeling was that we were doing patients a disservice, that we were putting them on this Procrustean rack of a concept of a medical philosophy, which had become completely redundant. A little bit of background here. This concept of the magic bullet dates back to a time, really the second half of the 19th century. That's where you can trace its origins to a time when infectious diseases were the most important cause of morbidity and mortality. And if you are working in that kind of public health context, the idea of, first of all, identifying the pathogen that causes the disease, and these are Koch's postulates, which are very famous. You can take a microbe from a diseased person or animal, and you can transfer that to the next subject. It will reproduce the disease. This is where the concept of a disease per se comes from. And then if you can find a metabolic chink in the armor of that microbe, hopefully you can kill the microbe without killing the man. And so I'm not being sexist. I'm just going for the onomatopoeic. And this gives rise to eventually to the antibiotics. And the antibiotics, there's the penicillins, the semi-synthetics, the synthetics. These provide molecules that you can generate IP around. You can patent them, and then you can then decide on a huge ROI, which gives rise to the birth of the fundamentally malignant pharmaceutical industry that exists today. And because it has such an influence on the curricula in medical schools, you have generations of doctors who pass through this educational process. They come out at the other side, and they're still thinking in terms of specificity, derivations of the magic bullet. And so in pharmaceutical pharmacology, we've moved from drugs that target classes of receptors to subclasses. We've moved from drugs that target enzymes to isoforms of the enzymes. And we've moved to the biologicals, which in many cases are acting on very small stretches of genetic information, which may be DNA or RNA. And you would think that if this approach, this idea of moving towards specificity was actually the right way to approach the diseases of today, which are not, by and large, the infectious diseases, although they're coming back, then by now we would have cures for heart disease and cancer and Alzheimer's. We don't. And that should be enough to tell you. And we've invested so much time and talent into developing these magic bullets, and we really haven't achieved very much. That should be enough to tell you we're going in the wrong direction. But the philosophy that still dominates medical thinking is this magic bullet idea. And it's led us into what I think of as somewhat of a cul-de-sac. If you look at vestigial groups, if you look at the health of hunter-gatherer communities, the well-known ones are the Hadza in Tanzania, forager horticulturalists, such as the Tsimani in Bolivia, they have a health span which at least matches ours, and is probably rather better in many cases. If you go to the mid-Victorians, that's 1850 to 1895 in England, and this is a population I was able to explore working together with a wonderful historian called Judith Robotham. You can find a population which actually was healthier for longer than we are today, but without modern pharmaceuticals, without modern surgery, and obviously without modern screening. So we looked at their diet, we looked at the modern diet, and it began to become apparent that one of the reasons we have so much disease today, so much chronic degenerative disease, and I can give you a list of 80 or more, all of which are increasing in frequency, and in many cases decreasing in latency, that is occurring in younger and younger groups of patients. That tells you a number of different things. Firstly, it's clear that our lifestyle is creating a whole new raft of risk factors for these multiple diseases, which might be autoimmune, neurodegenerative, cardiovascular, connective tissue disorders, the list goes on and on. In some ways, they're not diseases at all, not in the classic sense. They're not caused by a specific microbe leading to a specific pattern. They are, in fact, a constellation of symptoms caused by the modern diet and lifestyle, mediated by a very small number of pathogenic mechanisms. And these include chronic inflammatory stress, they include glycative stress, they include dysbiosis, and various patterns of malnutrition, including one which is called type B. But they're not diseases in the classic sense at all. So, for example, you talk to a neurologist and ask him or her, what is Parkinsonism? And they will tell you, well, actually, there's a lot of different conditions that we call Parkinsonism. Every Parkinsonian patient is rather different. And it's not surprising when you consider the extraordinary complexity of what's going on inside your brain, not just the neurochemistry and neurophysiology, but the intracellular machinery and its incredibly interactive system is capable of going wrong in so many ways. You know, a car can break down in 100 ways. Your brain can start to malfunction probably in 500 different ways. And if it starts here, it may well end up in clinically presenting as something that looks like Parkinsonism. Rigidity, tremor, micrographia, all the rest of those sorts of things. These are all different diseases, in a sense. They all have different starting points. They may end up looking the same, but that's a wastebasket and heterogeneous diagnostic category. So the idea that you can use a single drug to prevent Parkinsonism is absurd.
It's nonsense,
it's absurd.
isn't it? Yeah.
It's absolutely nonsense. You need to find an environment which will provide you with all the protective cofactors that are relevant in terms of neurochemistry and neurophysiology. The vestigial data tells us that this is possible. We can identify populations in which the frequency of these degenerative diseases is much lower than the frequency that we experience. So, for example, the Hadza, the Tsimane, and the mid-Victorians, they have all the diseases that we do, or syndromes, really, we should call them. But at levels that are probably only 10% of the levels that we see today. And 10% is a really interesting number. It tells us two things, and you may have heard me mention this before. It indicates, or it suggests, that approximately 90% of the burden of chronic degenerative disease that we see today could be avoided if we could identify what's going wrong and create a diet and lifestyle designed to support rather than damage. But it also indicates that, well, in these vestigial cultures who are eating and living in a much healthier way, they're still getting these diseases, only 10% of what we see. That matches the 10% of the patients that many experts will tell you are driven predominantly by strong genetic risk factors. I think in those vestigial cultures, it's only the people with strong genetic risk factors who progress through towards, a neurodegenerative condition, a cardiovascular condition, or whatever else it might be. Everyone else is protected. Now, what has happened to us is that in many, many ways, thanks to the murderous irresponsibility of the food industry, these protective elements have been removed progressively from the diet, the tide, the wave has moved down the beach, many more of us are exposed. Now, you can throw drugs, pharmaceuticals at these people, kill a lot of them, not cure anything, but manage their conditions, reduce or remove, maybe reduce in most cases, some of the symptoms, which are causing pain and debility. And we have a duty of care to our patients, and that's not a bad thing. But if we want to bring the tide back up the beach, those protective elements, which, according to the vestigial data, should be enough to protect the majority of the population, up to 90%, pharmaceuticals are not the right way at all. That is the way of pharmaco-nutrition, grasshopper. And that is what we practice.
Wow.
That was a fantastic explanation. Brilliant. And so basically, putting that into the simplest possible terms, it's what you're basically looking at is the value of good quality food and what that does in terms of protecting our bodies, in terms of our health and well-being and longevity. That's what pharmaco-nutrition is.
Well, yes, but the concept of letting your food be your medicine is hardly new. It goes back to Hippocrates, as you know.
Yeah.
What we've tried to do is to parse that and represent it and rephrase it in terms of pharmacology, the science of pharmacology. So we're looking at specific actions within specific areas of your endocrinology, your epigenetics, your metabolome, your microbiota, and we're not just saying let your food be your medicine. We're not just saying eat and drink more healthily and take more action, take more physical activity. That is not going to be enough to persuade the medical profession, and quite rightly so. Scientists and certainly doctors should be skeptical as their default position. So my task, as I have seen it, has been to start off with this generally Hippocratic idea and break it down into its constituent elements. And in order to be able to demonstrate, well, why is it and how is it that this particular nutrient or group of nutrients which modifies this particular process, how is that clinically relevant? And then to develop formulations which we can put into patients and eventually into clinical trials, prospective randomized clinical trials, which is the type of proof that many doctors require, many scientists require, and produce something that is not just emotionally, something that is assimilable. I mean, a lot of people, I like the idea of food being medicine, but it has to be intellectually robust.
Yeah.
If we're going to move into orthodox medicine, we have to produce and present a case which can be tested to destruction, hopefully, or at least in part, so that it can be improved on.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been trying to do for the last half century.
Wow. Incredible. So obviously we're here as Test Team, and a little bit of our background in terms of fertility. There's been a lot of press and coverage around the decline in semen quality over the last sort of 5 decades or so. Have you done much research and kind of work in that area, or the understanding of what you've been talking about in terms of sperm quality?
Well, it's an area I find very interesting, because when you look at the data on falling sperm counts and in increased abnormal sperm morphology and functionality, it seems to be predominantly confined to those parts of the world which have really adopted the modern diet. Now, if you look at different continents, this rather calamitous decline in sperm counts, which is probably around by 2/3, in fact, over the last 2 generations or so, maybe 3 generations. It doesn't seem to have happened to anything like the same extent in one particular part of the world, which is Africa. And Africa is that continent which has probably been where the move towards ultra-processed foods has made less inroads than in many other parts of the world. And I think that's an important clue. Now, I remember when this concept of falling sperm counts first became important, some some overqualified doctor stepped up and said, "Oh, it's because men are wearing tight underpants." And, it's because, the testicles are being overheated. And of course, if you go back to medical school, we all knew that if you were going to go out for a night on the town, the best thing to do beforehand was to slip a light bulb down the front of your trousers. And that was a form of very crude contraception. I don't know whether you're
I don't think
familiar
I've
with
heard that one
No,
before.
I've not heard that one before.
No.
That's
But
a good one.
At least we believed it would reduce our sperm counts and reduce the possibility of a subsequent unplanned family. And I don't. When this doctor, I want to spare his blushes. I won't mention names. First came out with that, I thought, well, this is just comical. And this is first order thinking. And what I've learned, if I've learned anything at all over the years, is that nutrition, health, it's generally not first order processes. They're second and third order processes that you have to take into account. Anyway. Fast forward, we now know that sperm counts are falling more in some areas than in others. We know also that testosterone levels are falling. There's really good data to support that as well.
right.
And what do testosterone and spermatozoa have in common? Well, they're all to do about being male, but they're both being generated by the testes. And we know that the testes and the ovaries and various other organs in the body are immunologically privileged. That is because you're producing cells there which are not exactly the same as your own somatic cells. There is a possibility that they might be attacked by the immune system. So these organs are shielded in some ways from the immune system. And one of the aspects of that is that in the testes, for example, as the spermatozoa and testosterone and one or two other things are being formed, it is under conditions of a low level of inflammatory stress. And it's a low physiological level of inflammatory stress, and it's actually an important part of the process. If that is overwhelmed and you are suffering from chronic inflammatory stress, and that is impacting amongst other tissues, the testes, then both testosterone synthesis and spermatogenesis will be adversely impacted.
Yeah.
Could this be an explanation for the decline in sperm counts, sperm quality, and testosterone? And the answer is almost certainly yes, because we are clearly suffering more from chronic inflammatory stress than we were, say, 50 or 100 years ago. And we can tell that in two different ways. Firstly, look at the increase in all of the chronic degenerative diseases, probably all of which, include a chronic inflammatory component. That's one clue. The other clue is, let's look at what has happened in terms of our diet. So this process of dietary shift, which is really a concept that we get from Barry Popkin, who has been very influential in this area. We've seen a gradual reduction over time of our intakes of omega-3s, polyphenols, phytonutrients in general. We've seen an increase, and they're anti-inflammatory compounds, very important. Another one would be prebiotic fibers. They've declined as well. So some of the most important anti-inflammatory nutrients have been reduced, or in some cases removed altogether.
Yeah, eradicated, yeah.
And in their place, we have seen increases in our intakes of a number of pro-inflammatory compounds, which are generated more or less accidentally in the mass manufacture of ultra-processed foods for a variety of reasons. So the overall dietary environment clearly has become more pro-inflammatory. Our public health shifts tell us we have become more subject to chronic inflammatory stress. Coming back to the testes, it all kind of fits together. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. All these pieces fit extremely well. The corollary to that is that through a number of institutions and companies that I advise, we have developed a very, very interesting and very potent anti-inflammatory regime, which we can talk about later if you wish. But what we find when we move people onto this type of dietary input, that first of all, many of the chronic degenerative diseases will start to quieten down, symptoms become less intense, less frequent, and in many cases fade away altogether. But what we see also is that sperm counts start to increase. And we see that in multiple, very, very many cases where couples have been trying to conceive and had been entirely unsuccessful, even if they'd gone in to IVF protocols of one sort or another. Within a remarkably short period of time, the majority, even of these difficult cases, move to conception. And because we're dealing with nutrition rather than drugs, that nutrition is helping these people in all kinds of other ways. It's not just addressing the fertility issue, it's reducing the risks of many other morbidities, but it's also providing in the mother an environment which is more conducive to fetal health and subsequent child health. So I have now seen enough of these babies who've been through this program to recognize when I speak at meetings or conferences, people will very often bring their babies to meet me. I've met several hundred of them by now. And even when they're very young, you see these very young babies, anything from, let's say, a month to a couple of years old. And the incredible thing is they're all alert. They're looking around. They're interested in the proceeding. But in general, they're not crying. And you can just tell there's an intelligence there, an acute intelligence. It's I mean, do you remember that film, the Midwich Cuckoos?
Yes. Yeah. It's probably dated for these young boys.
Yeah, you got two blank faces here, Paul, with me and Toby.
But I was born in the 70s, so I do know this one. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think we're raising a batch of Midwich Cuckoos, but I think what we are helping to bring onto the stage is a group of infants who are able to express their genetically determined optimal potential. And I think that for many of us, that is no longer the case. We're being harmed and impeded by this rather toxic, I'll rephrase that, this highly toxic environment that we have allowed to be created for us, which prevents most of us from realizing our biological potential or our biological health span.
Yeah. And Paul, we were only discussing this before we jumped on the podcast earlier on about ultra processed foods, which is a book that that Ian is currently looking at. I've not read it yet, but it sounds absolutely fascinating in the fact that, as a generation or multiple generations moving forward, lifestyle and the progressiveness and the ability for people leading far faster lives and the requirement to have food on the go and fast food and various other things means that we're packaging food differently. We're not cooking things from scratch. We're not, processing the foods that we would have processed, 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. Everything's becoming pre-packed and ready done for us. And, the worry is that not only are we consuming pre-formed food, but they've got additives in there to protect for shelf life. There is additives in there to enhance taste and look and appearance in the supermarkets. And actually some of the ugly fruits and ugly vegetables and the root vegetables we're missing out on completely because it's all been sterilized and washed before it's our dinner table and so forth. And we know that the impact of plastics and microplastics is having a huge impact on, this pro-inflammatory sort of process. We can't process plastics and we're accumulating plastics all of the time. So it's no wonder that our bodies are really struggling from birth in today's sort of Western sort of style of living, in coping with these, sort of pollutants, I suppose is the best way to describe it, that were never there 50 years ago or 100 years ago or, in the Victorian age. And it's no wonder that these are accumulating and causing us disease. They're not ease, they're disease. And, the more that people take and not educated about the foods that they're eating and the way in which they could be cooked is actually quite damaging as a population. And it's no wonder that we see issues in fertility rates, both male and female fertility rates, and egg competency or oocyte competency and sperm competency and the structures of their DNA and epigenetics and microbiome. You know, we're missing a huge trick here. And unfortunately, we've still got old methods of treatment, which is what you said earlier on. I've been in the pharmaceutical world for a very long time. They've been very specific of single pharmacological agents rather than a polypharmacy approach. So these are trying to target particular symptoms or syndromes of fertility or infertility. And actually, it's not allowing the body to naturally physiologically do the things it's supposed to do. And I think this is the big challenge, isn't it? When we look at you know, sort of diseases, which obviously fertility is recognized by the WHO as a disease, is that actually we need to get back to the root cause of what could be happening here and say, actually, has 20-30 years of living in a Western society lifestyle and fast food and you know, poor diet and not looking at our lifestyle contributed to where we are when we're in our 30s or 40s or, you know, early 40s trying to conceive. And obviously people are leaving it a lot later in life to have children. You know, the fertile window hasn't really changed, but people are choosing to have children at a later time, which is complicating the overall fertility rate. So and I think one of the big things that's missing, and following your point, is the education. You know, often we're reflecting on information that is being provided through clinical trials and studies, but there seems to be an inertia of activity, recognizing it and moving forwards, almost a denial that actually, you know, eating well, lifestyle, diet, nutrition is so important when we're trying to you know, conceive and have a future family. So I completely with you with all the things that you've said, and it's one of the real big topics of ours in terms of our education and awareness with Test Tim, is that it's not about trying to find a drug. It's not about finding a treatment that's going to be specific, and IVF and ICSI are treatments. But it's not the only thing that people should be thinking about if they're struggling to conceive. There's a far more wider things that people should be looking at in order to improve the opportunity of helping our bodies naturally react to the world, as well as trying to, you know, be optimizing our physiological health and our fertility health to make that chance so much better. So absolutely applaud what work that you've been doing, and all the work that we're trying to do in to try and get that awareness across. So thank you for that.
Well, I mean, you've made a lot of points, and I try and unpack a few of them. I mean, you mentioned microplastics, but we could also give a shout out to the plasticizers, the so-called forever chemicals. Heavy metals are coming up on the inside track, partly because of increased industrial processing. We're seeing more people being exposed to not just heavy metals, but various other industrial pollutants as well. And as I said in the background, we're suffering from chronic inflammatory stress, dysbiosis, and all these other sorts of things. I think we're moving towards a crisis point, an inflection point. We're seeing increases in the frequency of very large numbers of chronic degenerative diseases. We're seeing people get sick and developing symptoms of these conditions progressively earlier and earlier and earlier. We're seeing health span beginning to decrease. Lifespan in some countries has been falling as well. You're talking about a very complex, iterative system, which is very robust. It has many subsystems and multiple buffering systems, which allows life to continue. And we're seeing signs of distress. If you get to a point where, if you consider how complex systems collapse, it's like, you know, the Hemingway idea. You go bankrupt very slowly and then all at once. And I think what we're witnessing is we're coming towards the end of the slow phase. I think we may be approaching a point at which you will see a catastrophic increase in these diseases. We've gone through the slow increase, and I think the inflection point is, if we continue in the way we're going, we may hit at some point within the next decade. I think we're quite close to it.
It's quite scary.
When we get there, this whole model that we have, which is, this ship of health, which is rotten, it's leaking, the sails are tattered, the rigging is falling apart, and we're trying to plug each hole with a new pharmaceutical, which is a strategy that is both toxic and ruinously expensive. It will be seen very clearly and manifestly to have failed. And at that point, we will be forced to start to move to a different model of promoting public health, which is not reactive, but which is genuinely preventative. Now, there's been a couple of quite large studies which have been done on polygenic risk analysis, that is taking large populations and looking at all the SNPs that you know that increase the risk of a certain disease. And if you find someone who's got all the SNPs that you think are bad, let's at least try and treat them prophylactically. They've tried that, it doesn't work, because even with all the SNPs that we now know of, which denote risk, they don't denote enough risk. It's environment that's the most important thing. And even if you could identify exactly who's going to go on to become ill, you can't really use multiple pharmaceuticals prophylactically. They're too toxic.
No.
Yeah.
What the vestigial data tells us is that if you've got the nutritional foundations right, the whole population then becomes healthier, and it's much more cost effective, much less dangerous. It's much kinder. But I'm talking about a model of public health which is utterly transformed from the one that we have now, which is pharmacocentric. It's reactive. It's based in and around the medical profession, and it's dominated by the pharmaceutical companies and the health insurance providers. What I'm talking about is a model of healthcare where health is delivered. The point of delivery is no longer in the pharmacy or in the clinic. It's actually at the supermarket checkout counter. And so the next time you go online and you go to virtual Aldi's or Waitrose or wherever, and you're taking your cursor through the different aisles, I can see a near future where there will be a sprite within that app, which will have some of the information about you that you choose to provide, and it will tell you, okay, I see you want to buy this. I actually know that you have inflammatory stress,
reaction,
a little bit more than you should, or at least a metabolism that is conducive to that. So would you consider, instead of making that food choice, making this one? Now, in order to make that possible, we need to develop something else as well, which is at-home self-testing systems. And so I'm very involved in that as well. So we have, with this company, Zinzino, we have something called the balance test, which is a dried blood spot test, which decentralizes a lot of medical testing. You, at your own time, at your own convenience, you take a couple of drops of blood, put it on a litmus paper, send it off to a third-party forensic analytical laboratory, and then a couple of weeks later, you go online and it will tell you, well, this is where you are. And it may be that you're in a healthy configuration, well done. And if you do, we give you your money back. If you have a ratio or a set of results that says, well, this is associated with a greater risk of moving towards that or this clinical endpoint, at that point, we can take that data and you can make a decision, an evidence-based decision, to make certain changes in your lifestyle. You can then test again and monitor those changes.
And that test, Paul, sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, that test is specifically looking at omega-3 versus omega-6, isn't it? Is that
well,
right?
Not just that. It measures a dozen different fatty acids, and it gives quite a meaningful porthole into a number of different metabolic processes. If you have a high 6-to-3 ratio and a low 3 index, it's important to look at both of those things. That is telling us that if you live in the temperate zones, you have a greater risk of developing chronic inflammatory stress and moving over time towards developing the clinical symptoms of a chronic degenerative disease. Now, I just want to stress this point. It's probably only relevant in the temperate zones. And the reason for that is that in the temperate zones, we have access to cold waters, many of us, cold water fish, long chain omega-3s. If you're in the tropical zone, no cold water, you don't have access to those omega-3 polyunsaturates, you don't have access to the same polyphenols or lipophenols, how is it that you can be a healthy Hindu centenarian? And that's perfectly possible when you have a 6-to-3 ratio of over 100. We see this routinely. And the answer is they're keeping inflammatory stress at bay using something else altogether.
Okay,
they're consuming very, very large amounts of polyphenols, which are the spicy cuisines. They're the tropical cuisines, aren't they?
Yeah.
So over time, I'm not trying to bring back the doctrine of signatures. What I'm trying to say is that in different places, in different parts of the world, people have developed different approaches that work for them.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, eventually no coincidence that in the tropical areas where there were no long-chain omega-3s, their diets very characteristically contain large amounts of spices, which are very, very rich sources of polyphenols. Now, the thing is, the polyphenols are excellent anti-inflammatory agents. We know where they interrupt the inflammatory cascade, but they are regarded by the body as foreign substances. So you have to consume them a couple of times every day.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That'll keep chronic inflammation at bay. If you stop taking them, and if you already don't have very many omega-3s, long-chain omega-3s in your body, you're going to be in big trouble. And that's what we're now seeing in China and India and parts of the world which are moving onto this junk, ultra-processed Western diet. They already didn't have very many long-chain omega-3s. Now they're reducing their intake of polyphenols. Public health in India and in those parts of China, which are becoming more westernized in dietary terms, is falling off a cliff.
So moving away from a Darwinian type of existence, survival of the fittest, by looking at the various nutrients that's available to us, into choosing ultra-processed food because it's become fashionable and it fits common lifestyle, doesn't it?
But it's not just fashionable, and yet, yes, I think you're right, and that's an important point. It fits the modern lifestyle. But the other point, I think, which has to be taken into consideration, is these foods are cheap, they're widely available, they're convenient, but they are ultra palatable. They are designed to be addictive.
It's tasty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And bliss point technology, which is this very insidious technology, is used to develop foods which meet many of the criteria of being addictive substances.
Yeah.
And so much so that in parts of the Midwest, there's a couple of clinics where they use, I think it's a 12-step program which they've adopted from the AA program to wean people off these ultra-processed foods, and it actually seems to work quite well.
Crazy, isn't it?
And now it gets even worse. It gets even worse because we now have more detailed work which shows that the more of these foods you eat, the more hippocampal damage there is, and changes in hippocampal and cortical neurochemistry, which create neuroinflammatory stress, which drive you towards addiction. So it's not just saying these foods are addictive and they're designed to be addictive. We now know why they are addictive. The food companies know this perfectly well.
And exploiting it.
But they're not going to, absolutely, they're exploiting it.
Yeah, sure.
So Kellogg's, for example, I think last year, the CEO of Kellogg's, a guy called Plotnick or something like that, who's the CEO and the managing director, he infamously said, because people have less money to spend, thanks to the corruption and irresponsibility of our political elites, this guy said, oh, well, if you're hard up, you just eat breakfast cereal for dinner. That's a good way to save money. I mean,
how irresponsible.
He knows that he's killing us. Yes, absolutely. He knows that he's killing us. But he's making a killing as well. And so here we are in a position where politics and economics meets nutrition, and for us, it's a disaster. For the people who own those companies, for the plantation owners who own a great deal of our environment, it's fantastic. They are all on board with the idea of depopulation, and they're absolutely happy with falling sperm counts and falling fertility. And the latest WHO projections on population levels, which indicate so many countries are now below maintenance levels of fertility
rate. For the
before
GDP.
the end of the century. Many countries, particularly the OECD countries, populations are going to fall by about 50%.
Yeah. And for fertility patients, they're not interested in the sort of mumbo jumbo political and nutritional sort of idea of the world. They really want to, look forward to having a family. And I think there is a big inflection point here, Paul, is that the more education, the more awareness that we can provide to couples that are, looking at embarking on family life and having children of their own, is that we've almost got to break this cycle of knowing that when you go to the GP and you've got an impaired sperm sample, or you're not conceiving after 12 months, is to stop thinking of the pharmacological intervention of going to an IVF clinic and saying, hold on, stop. What is causing, things that's not going on here? And for us, I think it's all a matter of taking a step back and looking at what is insufficient, what is deficient, what are we doing in our life, what are we doing on eating and drinking and being part of that. And those discussions invariably don't happen very well at a GP surgery. In fact, we know from
they don't have time. They don't have time for this
and
conversation.
we also know that having good friends as GPs, Ian and I went to a meeting last year where a question went out to 100 GPs and how many GPs were comfortable just doing a testicular examination. Only 2 out of 100 were comfortable doing a testicular examination to make sure all the tubes are in the right place and there's no lumps and bumps that shouldn't be present. So, if we look at, our Western world and Western medicine, we're missing a huge amount of physiological issues and, and other issues related to common food, nutrition, lifestyle, and other things, and exercise. And we're almost bypassing that and saying, okay, we recognize that you're infertile. Shoot down to the IVF clinic because they're more specialists in looking at this. And because you're not unhealthy, you're not ill, but you just can't have children. So go and see that specialist down there, and they will give you some drugs to try and help you have a child. And this is what the biggest trick for us is, where it's missing. And we've got to do more testing, I think, which is why our company's called Test Him, because we need to do further evaluated, good science-backed tests which can understand the biology of disease and where things are not going well, especially if it's either endocrine or hormonal imbalances, which is impacting testosterone production, which has an impact on sperm production. But other than that, we need to understand, what is the quality of the gametes that we're creating? Because if they're not good enough, we shouldn't be even trying to conceive or trying to conceive until we've got them into a particular healthy window, a fertile window, in order to get there. So,
but importantly, how do we create a better environment for them? How do we create better gametes? What are those interventions? I think that's obviously a lot of what you're saying here, Paul, is that environment, the UPF, the ultra processed foods. I think for because there's some big stuff that we're covering here. We're talking huge geopolitical issues and goodness knows what else. But for the day-to-day guy who's like listening to this thinking, I just want to get pregnant, I kind of don't need to worry about this kind of mass ultra-processed food thing. What does it mean to them? What have they got to try and do to overcome these barriers?
I think at this point we can go in one of 2 different ways. We can either give them the well-worn advice, cut down on the alcohol and the cigarettes and the ultra-processed foods and the deep and the fried foods, eat more fruits and vegetables, take more exercise, lose a little weight if that's appropriate. And that's all very basic stuff, and I absolutely go along with that. I think that you can leave it at that, or you can go to the next step, which would involve, I think, self-testing. And I've already mentioned this idea of measuring your fatty acid profile. There's a new blood test coming online now, which will measure dysbiosis as well. So these are tests you can do at home. You don't have to go to see a specialist about that. And once you've got your results, if there is an issue, then there are very clear things, very specific things you can do to put them right. That dysbiosis test is not yet available. It will be so by the end of the year. This is, I think, quite a breakthrough, because up until now, tests for dysbiosis, which we know adversely affects fertility in both men and in women.
Actually, Paul, can you just explain what dysbiosis is for people that aren't aware?
Right. Well, we contain very large numbers of microbes inside us. There are more of them than there are of us, more microbial cells than human cells, and considerably larger number of genes and metabolic steps and metabolites that they produce. And traditionally, we consumed a diet containing very large amounts of prebiotic fiber. These are a form of carbohydrates, but you can't digest them. They move into the large intestine and become fuel for families of bacteria that we now know are very good for us. And our intake has fallen catastrophically, even in the last century, where we were consuming, in some cases, a fifth of our calorific requirements from these fibers, over 100 grams a day. We're probably not consuming more than 2, 3, or 4 grams a day. The result of that has been that the good bacteria, which we can call saccharolytic, that is, they eat those fibers, they've died off, and they've been largely replaced by bacteria which consume protein. Not from our diet, because proteins are absorbed in the small intestine, but they consume mucins, which are proteins that produce the mucus layer that lies over the lining of the the colon, the gastrointestinal tract, and protects it. So they eat these proteins, they erode the mucus layer, they come into direct contact with the colonocytes, our cells, which line the colon, and this creates enormous chronic inflammatory stress. The tight cell junctions open up, and now you start seeing initially the leakage of toxic macromolecules into the bloodstream, gets into the portal bloodstream and hits the liver, which is one of the reasons we have so much liver disease now, and why the figures for liver cancer are skyrocketing. But that also creates inflammatory stress, which affects the cardiovascular system, increased risk of heart attacks and stroke, and attacks the brain as well, leading to a vastly increased incidence of neurodegenerative disease. So that's bad news. You want to restore the healthy profile of microbes in the large intestine, and you do that simply by consuming more of these prebiotic fibers. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. Now, these prebiotic fibers have been removed from the diet by the people who give us ultra-processed foods. And putting them back into the diet is a very straightforward thing to do. And at this point, I think that I can reveal that I'm advising one of the largest players in the B2C space where foods are concerned. They have finally concluded that selling foods to their customers would kill them is not actually a good business model. And they're very
would you believe it? Yeah.
Yes. So because they've looked at the WHO population projection data, and they think, well, actually, this is not good for us. So we're now developing a range of ultra processed foods, which will be relatively inexpensive. They'll be convenient. They'll have a long shelf life. They will have the right profit margin per square foot of shelf space. They'll be hyper palatable. All the rest, which is what the industry needs and what consumers want. But instead of being unhealthy, they'll be profoundly healthy. And it only takes a relatively small reconfiguration to turn ultra processed foods from carriers of disease and death to becoming profoundly functional and profoundly health supportive. That's where we're going now.
That's
up
fantastic.
Until now, it's a big deal. It's another inflection. And I think up until now, if you look at what happened in Japan, they have this product, this category of food called foshu, food for specific health use. And for a long time, it was just very small companies doing a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit cranky. And people bought into it, but only on a small scale. And then at a certain point, you had a couple of major Japanese companies, Meiji and Ajinomoto, who launched functional foods. They looked at what was happening at the fringes of the market and thought, we'll have some of that. And it really took off. So it's taken off to the point now that if you launch a food into the Japanese market, if it doesn't have a health claim, it's not going to do very well. So it's completely changed the Japanese perception of what processed food actually is. Now, why has it not happened in the West? And the reason is our regulatory agencies, who are completely boneheaded and have basically been co-opted by the pharmaceutical industry, have made it impossible to make meaningful claims about food. You can only make disease-related claims if you have a pharmaceutical license. they're holding a Maginot Line, which is no longer appropriate. And so the food companies have said, and this is not irrational, well, why should we spend money on developmental costs? Why should we increase the price of a loaf of bread by 5 cents if at the end of it we can't make a claim that will result in increased sales? And I understand that position completely. And so nobody's really dabbled in this, apart from very small companies, and sometimes very small subsidiaries of the larger companies. This big company, which is absolutely huge, and you probably have guessed who it is, have now started to develop these lines of foods. I can produce, for example, a genuinely happy meal, not McDonald's happy meal, which is going to make you sick.
Not with a toy.
It's going to kill you. No, exactly. It might make you happy transiently, but in the long term, it's going to make you very unhappy indeed. It actually causes, and it encourages depressive illness, amongst other things. But there are new ingredients available now which actually act as antidepressants, natural antidepressants, extremely effective ones. And we're engineering these into some of the ultra-processed foods. So these will be genuinely happy meals. And the interesting thing is these actives have a very rapid onset of action. So once you've consumed the meal, within 2 hours, you're going to start feeling better.
That's insane.
That sounds good to
Absolutely.
me.
Yeah, but this is just one. But this is just one area that I'm developing. There's a whole range of other functional foods which are starting to hit. Yeah, they're going through the developmental labs now, and they're going to be, I think, commercially available, at least in North America, by Q1 of next year.
Wow, fantastic.
They'll come to the UK and Australia next. So now you know what the distribution pattern is. I'm sure you know what the company that is involved is. And I think that they will start to re-engineer people's ideas about what food actually is. In other words, it's not only energy and something that tastes good and gets you through the day. It's something that's going to improve me.
Yeah.
And make my life
As it
better.
should be, as it should have always been.
Yes, exactly. So we're actually getting to that point. And once this one company has made this launch, and I think it's going to create waves everywhere, every other major food company is going to be forced to follow suit.
Good.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think things are going to change.
That's really good.
I'm still curious what company it is.
I haven't worked it out either. Yeah.
Does it begin with N? Does it
You're,
begin with N, Paul?
you can work it out.
Yeah, let's not push him. Let's not push him live in there.
We won't.
I think I just want to sort of say for the average bloke, like I say, bringing it back to patients listening to this, I think, and for a lot of guys that we've spoken to, but I think probably the majority get it that they need to eat healthily. But I don't think there is a very strong connect in a man's mind between what he eats and the quality of his ejaculate. I don't think they quite realise the impact it has. And also, like Mike alluded to earlier, that education piece of, well, I'm just going to grab a sandwich on the go, and I'm going to go to a shop on the high street that claims to be natural or claims to be healthy, because it's very hard for people to understand what is ultra processed and what isn't.
Yeah.
And you hear nutrition, you got to have whole food. So what is a whole food? Well, actually, just means it hasn't been. It's not manufactured stuff to look like and taste like food. It's just actual real food. So I think it's very hard for people to understand that how much of an impact this has on their fertility, but also understand what they what part of their diet is actually being mass produced and has had its omega-3 stripped out. It's very hard as a consumer to understand this stuff.
We start off from the wrong intellectual position. I think that we don't think preventatively about health very much.
Exactly.
No.
I mean, if we do, maybe it consists of a smoking cessation program or a little bit of weight loss. The prevailing model is wait until we get sick, then we go to the doctor. And the medical profession and the pharmaceutical industry have actively encouraged that way of thinking.
Yeah.
And you have this rather unholy alliance between the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry, and there's a lot of cross-ownership between them. And behind them, lurking in the background, you have big financial organizations which own all of them. And we're encouraged to eat this terrible diet, and it makes us sick, and then we go to get medical treatment. And both partners love this arrangement. because the pharmaceutical industry says thank you to the food industry for sending us these chronically ill patients who we will then treat for the rest of their increasingly sick lives. That's great business. And the food industry is very grateful to the pharmaceutical industry for supplying drugs which mask the terrible damage that the food industry is inflicting on the public. And here we are, the general public, we're being ground between these two millstones, and we're being crippled and killed off prematurely by this infernal arrangement. And I guess what I'm saying to you is that the road to better good health is very short, very straight, and very simple. Stop eating ultra processed foods and fast foods and learn how to cook. Learn how to work with basic produce. And for anyone who suffers from a chronic degenerative disease or is worried about that, for anyone who has impaired fertility and wants to do something about that, this is one of the very simple, very basic first steps that I would recommend.
Yeah, as do we. I think actually, Paul, that's a really good place for us to kind of draw this conversation to a close. We've already taken an hour of your time, and I think we could easily probably spend another 3 or 4 or 5 hours talking about this subject.
Fascinating.
We've just scratched the surface.
Haven't we? I know we have.
Well, we may need to invite you back on, Paul, because I think there's so much more, good quality information here, and forms part of the educational aspects of what we're trying to do. And I know you're very passionate about sharing that education about the impact of food and nutrition in society. And I think we've been very impressed by the approach that you've had, and we're very much aligned in the fact that we've got to diagnose patients properly, by doing some of these tests, which are now becoming more acceptable, the home-based tests, the finger prick tests and so forth. We're used to it through COVID and various other things. So we're very much more aligned to that. And I think with being a little bit more specific about testing and then looking at what the options are, then we're not falling back on traditional methods of medicine, of IVF and ICSI. We're actually getting to the nub of the issue, which is like, what is the real issue that's going on in our bodies? Is it nutritional? Can we identify what it is? Can we identify what's insufficient, deficient, or food groups that we should be completely avoiding, which is these ultra processed foods that we don't really know what the impact is having on our bodies. Well, we probably do know what it's having on our bodies, but the most important thing I think is what you've said earlier on, is the fact that we need to recognize it, we need to speak about it, we need to educate about it, and then we need to ultimately test and get the proper advice from good clinical studies that can actually improve our physical health. And then that will have a natural impact on our fertility health, and hopefully that will have a natural conception by the way in which we treat things. So I think it's absolutely fascinating what work that you're doing, Paul, and a big thank you certainly from me as a scientist myself. That's what we're trying to do, is the appliance of science in what we're trying to approach through the work that we're doing. So a big thank you for all the contributions that you're making.
And you haven't really seen Mike, I don't think, Paul, from the angle you're sat at, but he's been grinning from ear to ear all the way through this conversation.
There you are.
I've been looking at you, trying to make eye contact, but clearly the camera's pointing in the wrong direction. But absolutely nodding, and completely agree with everything that you've been saying.
And just say that actually you've got a few books out as well, haven't you, Paul, on this subject? Is that right?
I do. Yeah, there's a few floating around out there.
Yeah, so for people listening, check out Paul Clayton. I'm sure you can be found pretty easily with a Google search or Amazon or other book suppliers. But
not to be confused with the Paul Clayton who's the CEO of Jamba Juice.
That's unfortunate, isn't it?
Confused with
nothing to do with you.
No. But could I just say that there's no need to buy any books. A lot of this stuff is available absolutely for free on my blog, which is drpaulclayton.eu. My publisher, it's quite opinionated. My publisher likes to say there's something there to annoy everyone. I hope you find something there to annoy you.
Excellent. That's really good.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Paul.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Paul. Really appreciated it. And like Mike says, I think maybe another conversation will be due in the future.
Especially if we can find time to do that, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, excellent.
Brilliant.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Paul.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Wow, what did you make of that? I mean, my little brain is just gone kaboom. There was a point at the early part of that podcast where I was just like, oh my God, this guy's. He said like, I don't want to talk too much about myself. I'm kind of not that interested. Oh my God, I could literally sit and listen to him for hours.
Well, it's the first time you've heard from him. I mean, me and Mike have had a meeting with him before, and it's
Me,
like,
Mick and Mike.
Me, Mick and Mike, yeah.
Mick and Mike.
Yeah. But yeah, it's bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah,
Absolutely bonkers.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the level of science that Paul and various other colleagues have gone through, and what was interesting is that he's been part of that committee of safety of medicines, and that is not a small feat in itself. Assessing drugs and assessing companies and so forth. I mean, there's a massive level of work there, and he's almost said, actually, we've forgotten the biggest trick in the world. It's our food. And what functional pharmacological aspects of our food.
Which is where I think that's what he was alluding to. It's where medicine has come from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Chinese medicine is based in.
I was going to say Chinese medicine. It kind of like
exactly. Like when you get poorly in Chinese culture, it's like, okay, we'll make you a soup with certain ingredients because they will nourish your fluids or cool down heat or whatever it is. That's where medicine has always come from, isn't it? It's nature. But we've come I guess in our medical world, this is what he's saying, in the medical world we've gone further and further from that, but at the same time you've got this mass production of ultra processed food and that feeding into our kind of diet and our lifestyle. It's a perfect combination, perfect storm of disaster.
I mean, it's no coincidence, is it, that the increase in ultra processed foods and the increase of our general health that increase in poor health. I mean, he hit it on the head there, didn't he?
Yeah. In my mind, I think this is even more important, or equally as important as what we're considering now with the environment. I think when you look at all the different governments around the world that are focused and obsessive about environment and carbon,
being green,
carbon dioxide, and all the green element. This is equally important to get right globally for future generations to come.
But also like health policy, like, we've just had the men's health strategy that we've talked about. I mean, I don't know when this episode's going out. It might be months and months ago that we had that. But, we're looking at men's health, we're looking at prostate cancer, we're looking at, suicide rates, mental health, all this, that and the other. And I've often said this, look at the big, and this is exactly what Paul's just said, the big ills in society. So much of it could be fixed by the right food. Eating.
Or just changing the foods that we're eating. It's a recognition that some of the food companies, and we had this with Richard Lee, if you remember, about
it feels very full
very
circle,
similar.
doesn't it?
You've got some like two big scientists saying almost very similar things, is that we're creating our own damage and our own environment, and it's having an impact on disease and fertility rates and so forth. And actually, what the takeaway for me is this is really simple, and you can do this really quite quickly.
The takeaway is no takeaway.
No takeaway. No takeaway. Exactly right. So I mean, it's just phenomenal, isn't it? It's recognizing that food can make such an important impact on your health and your fertility health. Look at it, recognize it. Take some advice, come and see us, or there's nutritionists out there that are specialists in fertility nutrition. Let's go and work it out, and just start making sure that we're doing the very best that we can do on our nutritional input, to make sure that our fertility output is going to be the best we can.
Well, I'll go back to the point that I made during the chat with Paul, is that most guys, I don't think, make that level of connection.
No,
I've got to go to a nutritionist. She's going to tell me, or he's going to tell me to eat more seeds and nuts and more leafy greens. Does it really make a difference? I can just go and get a salad from M&S.
The guidance is a bit bland, isn't it? Really, I mean, I
don't think it's bland. I think it's. I just don't think guys get it.
No,
or they don't get it enough that this makes a massive difference to your sperm health.
But that feels like a very much a big statement to get it right. I mean, this is scientific research he's done. So it's kind of black and white, really.
And I think we should mention the book that we're both listening to at the moment, and Shafi Wardak mentioned it, Ultra Processed People by Chris Van Tolkien, or whatever their surname is. If you haven't listened to that, go and listen to that. And he talks about that actually in the book, doesn't he? It's a bit like Alan Carr's Quit Smoking book. But in that book, which I've read, I've never smoked, but I read it. He tells you to carry on smoking whilst you listen to the book.
That's right, and which makes it easier to quit.
Because then you learn what this stuff's doing to you. And I think the other thing here actually is that because a lot of people might listen to this and think, oh my God, I've been doing it all wrong. I've been eating such bad food. It's all my fault. It's not. This is not. You can't blame yourself for this. Like if you're not eating well, or if your sperm quality is not very good, and your diet's not, perfect, I wouldn't beat yourself up about that. I just, this is so pervasive. It's so within our life that it's really bloody hard to avoid ultra processed food. I mean, I am very aware of it. You're very aware of it. You've worked in kitchens.
There's brands, isn't there? There's big brands in the supermarket. You are attracted by, the look and feel and the brand essence that these companies are portraying. But if they're ultra processed, which inevitably there will be because they're full of branding all over them.
If it's being sold to you, and if it's making claims, chances are it's ultra processed.
Yeah, but we were talking earlier about as you know, I'm quite conscious of food. I love cooking and I love food, so it's quite straightforward for me. But even then, it's still actually quite hard to completely eliminate ultra processed foods, as we were talking earlier. And also in particular, people that have perhaps vegan or gluten free or dairy intolerant, etc. That's almost impossible, to eat food without ultra processed foods being in their diet, because any alternative foods are typically going to be very highly processed.
I think as a gluten and dairy free fussy bugger, with good reason, but it's very easy to think, okay, well, I've changed my diet. I can't have bread. I can't have cheese, I can't have this, that and the other, so you go to the alternatives. Think, well, actually, because I still want to have those in my life, so I'll get some gluten-free bread and I'll get some dairy-free spread and all this, that and the other, because you kind of feel like, oh well, I don't want to miss out, I want to replace it, but actually everything then is ultra processed and hideous. But actually, if you want to go gluten and dairy-free or whatever it is, actually a gluten-free diet is, I can have a really nice piece of salmon with a salad and some boiled potatoes.
Yeah, it's just a different choice, isn't it?
Yeah, which is actually what I would want to eat anyway.
Yeah, but a gluten-free diet really is stop eating gluten, as in don't find an alternative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I think that's the education we've kind of got now, is we're, again, through marketing, is that if you want a vegan diet or a gluten-free diet, it's here's the alternative. Rather than actually just, okay, well, if I'm vegan, I'm not eating meat, fish, etc. You just go to vegetables.
Exactly. That's what it should be.
Yeah. It's not just going to the frozen section of the supermarket and
find an alternative.
And trying to find an alternative, because those will naturally be probably ultra processed. They probably won't have gluten in them or various other dairy aspects in it. But you just got to be thinking whole foods, cook from scratch wherever possible. That's probably going to have more nutritional content than something that's straight out of the freezer. And I get it that people do have busy work lives and you need something in the freezer to cook when you come home,
and it is difficult.
But if the whole food, frozen foods rather than ultra processed foods, just because it looks, it's like the old bacon butty. What's the vegan bacon butty? It's just going to be, it might look like a piece of bacon, but it's not.
I had this conversation with a mate of mine who was like, oh yeah, no, we just get vegan sausages. I said to him, they're worse than normal sausages. So they're full of so much crap. Oh really? It's like, yes, really. You couldn't believe it.
You're just replacing one taste with a different taste, and there's actually no nutrition in it at all.
But I'm really curious about his ultra processed foods that are good for you. That sounds intriguing. Really intriguing. I mean, if that all is as good as what he's saying, I mean, we might know by the time this goes out that that's out. But that's something that I'd love to be involved with in some sort of promotional way, because if those claims are correct, and there's actually a very healthy, this will fix instead of do damage. I mean,
if you could just do that in some of the staples like bread and margarine and cereals or something like that, like the day-to-day stuff that people are having, it's going to make such a difference. Just being able to say, okay, actually I'm having that and it's got the right nutrients in it that are going to nourish me.
Phenomenal. But my mind's blown. I feel like I need a cup of tea.
You know what? I'm going to have my afternoon apple. I'm going to have some polyphenols.
I thought you could say his afternoon nap.
He did say nap.
In the studio.
Sure my afternoon napple.
Your napple. Oh my word.
Brilliant.
But no, that's been absolutely fantastic to have him on board, and we'll look forward to following him and all the work that he's doing.
Let us know what you thought of this episode.
It was a very controversial one for sure. It was a big statement.
Yeah, there was some big statements in there. We are aware that has some quite strong views on that one. and it may not be everyone's cup of tea what he said, but
it's good to talk about. I think it's a really interesting topic to chat about. I could literally chat all day with that guy. He's brilliant. Not that I said much,
or just listen.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. See you later. Bye
Bye now.